You will start the war. You start it? This one. T-shirt and that moves upside down.
It's already going online, Maharaj.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
Hare Krishna. Namam Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nitya Namane Namaste Saraswata Devi Gauravani Prashadane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastakshadesh Tarane Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sri Gauravak Farinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So this is a presentation of part of the Jaiva Dharma, which is a rather long work by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. It's a little bit of an experimental work. Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote some of his things in Sanskrit, some poetic works or whatever, philosophical works in Sanskrit. He wrote some of his works in Bengali. So this is a Bengali work. The unique feature is that the framework is a story. And it's a story of some devotees about 2 generations after the disappearance of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and they live in Navadvip area. And there's some of them are Babajis, or renounced people, living in one place around Godrum. And then there is several people from the town who kind of influenced by smart ideas, etc. And they come and visit the Babajis, and they begin asking questions, etc. And then in the course of the discussions, then sometimes the Muslims come along and they start asking questions also. So we get a little bit of a mixture of explanation of different dharmas, as well as Hindu Dharma and Vaisnava Dharma. And it takes the teachings take place through questions and answers between the various characters. So the title of the work is Jaiva Dharma, which means the Dharma of the Jiva, and then Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains the meaning of Dharma. Now, normally we speak of Dharma, we mean religion or Indian tradition or something like that. But there's a more specific meaning here, what Dharma means, and he explains that in his first chapter. Now, ultimately, the Jaiva Dharma, or the Dharma of the Jiva, is prema. That's the final conclusion of everything. And the work is a discussion of various topics, starting out with the nature of the Jiva, and then explains bhakti and prema, and then he tries to relate the Vaishnava Dharma with traditional Varnashram Dharma, etc. And then he also compares it with Islam in discussion with some Muslims, and then he goes into the more details of the philosophy, and he even gives the whole summary of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, or Nectar Devotion, and Ujjvala Nilamani. So he puts a lot of things in this work. So it's a summary of a lot of Rupa Goswami's teachings. But the first part is interesting because of the unique way in which Bhaktivinoda Thakur presents various ideas for the modern world, because people are asking questions. Well, what about this? And what about this? He says, answers all these questions. So, this first chapter deals with what is eternal Dharma, or Nitya Dharma. So we can say that the eternal nature of an object is its eternal Dharma, or its Nitya Dharma, something that lasts forever. The object, the nature of the object. If if it changes, then it's not called Nitya Dharma. So, when Krishna manifests different objects, they have their specific nature, or their original nature. So that is their eternal Dharma. Now it may get covered over, but so then that covered over Dharma is not the eternal Dharma, may change, but that which is its very nature when it's first created, that's its eternal Dharma. So we have the eternal nature of an object, and then in certain circumstances, the object begins to change or get distorted, and then the characteristics are altered. So then that's not its eternal nature anymore. It's gone through a transformation. But because it lasts so long, it may seem to be the eternal nature of the object, even though it isn't. So we have an example of water. Oh, happened. What would you do to it?
I just changed the projector, Maharaj.
Oh, it's a different projector.
Yeah.
So it's multi-projector. Yeah, okay. So water is a substance, and it's got its particular qualities to it. Like it's liquid, it's clear, it's got a sweet taste to it, etc. So that we say it's relatively eternal Dharma as far as water is concerned. Then when we put it in a different condition, that is below 30 degrees for some time, it turns into ice. So ice is different. It is not liquid, it's solid. It's very cold. You cannot drink it. So it's changed its nature. So that's its temporary Dharma, which we call its Nisarga Dharma, or Nisarga Dharma. The eternal Dharma would be the liquid water, and the ice with its qualities would be the temporary Dharma. So we have this discussion because we're talking about the Jiva. So we want to know what is the essential nature of the Jiva, and then what's its distorted nature. So we have three types of objects. Supreme Lord, and he never gets distorted. We have jivas, subject to distortion, and we have matter. And of course, matter is always changing. So then we should find out, particularly, what is the real nature of the jiva, or the Nitya Dharma of the jiva. That should be the topic of discussion for us, because we're talking about Atma, so rather than body, we're talking about Atma. So in this way, we have to inquire what is the real nature of the jiva. And of course, we should relate these things to each other. How do we relate matter with the jiva? How do we relate the jiva to the Supreme Lord? How do we relate matter to the Supreme Lord? So we should understand the relationships between these three objects: matter, jivas, and Supreme Lord. So if we have the correct knowledge, this is real knowledge. This is the basis of all of our philosophy, if we have correct knowledge of things. And of course, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has very clearly given this relationship. Jiva Sarupabhoy Krishna Nitya Das. The Jiva's Sarup, that's his eternal nature, his basic nature, is to be eternal servant of Krishna. And then he says that the Jiva is Tatastha Shakti, or borderline Shakti of Krishna. And he's simultaneously different and non-different from Supreme Lord. But then he says, Krishna Bole Se Jiva, Anadi, bahir, mukha. The Jiva forgets Krishna and without beginning is in another state called bahir, mukha, turned away from Krishna, not knowing Krishna, ignorant of Krishna. And because of that, he experiences, Maya gives him the suffering of repeated birth and death in this material world. So this is the changed nature of the Jiva. The original nature is to be eternal servant of Krishna. The changed nature is to be forget the Lord, ignore the Lord, and relate to material energy, get material bodies, and take birth after birth in the material world. That's the distorted nature of the Jiva. So in this statement, the second line, Krishna Tatashta Shakti Veda Be Prakash, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says the Jiva is Tatasta Shakti. It is an energy of the Lord which is situated on the borderline. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains the borderline it's between the spiritual and material worlds. It is not permanent in the spiritual world, it's not permanently in the material world. It's got a position it can shift from one to the other. So it can be in the material world, it's covered with Maya, like a prisoner, or Jiva can be in spiritual world like this. So this is unlike Supreme Lord. Supreme Lord can come in the material world, but he doesn't get contaminated or bound up by Prakriti or matter, like the Jiva. So even if he comes to the material world, the Lord is always in the spiritual world, so to speak. He's not contaminated at all. So nature of the Jiva, he can get contaminated, so makes him different. But he can also be in the spiritual world. So in this way, he's Tatashta. So we have a pure spiritual object. That's the opposite of a material object. So a real spiritual object really cannot relate to matter. It's quite different, like a fish out of water, so to speak. So the Jiva is a spiritual particle. It's not material. But because of its Tatashta nature, somehow it relates to matter. And it gets stuck in matter. So this is the Tatashta nature. Though it is spiritual, it can also get covered by matter and ignore the Lord and develop a completely different nature. So this is the nature of Jiva himself, possibility. The Bhaktivinoda Thakur has another way of explaining this Tatashta nature of the Jiva. Between the water of a river and the land, then we have the borderline. One is wet, one is dry, and then we get the borderline between them, which we call the shore. So that borderline is situated between those two, the wet and the dry. That's the dividing line. We can take, let's say, have the image of the Tatashta Shakti situated on the borderline. The Jiva is on the borderline. It can go one way or the other. And so it can be wet or it can be considered dry, one or the other. So the Jiva is spiritual, but it can get wet. It can get covered by material energy and be affected. So that's the strange nature of the Jiva. So that statement by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said that the Jiva, by nature, is servant of the Supreme Lord eternally. So he's different. He's not the same. He's spiritual, but he's different. Therefore, the Nitya Krishna Das, he's eternally the servant of the Lord. He never changes that position. So they are different. So the Lord is different from the Jiva. The Lord is also different from Maya, and he controls Maya. He also controls the Jiva. So that's the relationship. But the Jiva can get under influence of Maya. So this is the relationship between the three: Supreme Lord, Maya, and Jiva. both Jiva and Maya under the control of the Supreme Lord, but the Jiva can also get influenced by matter, and the Lord cannot. So, and then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu speaks about Beda Bed Prakash. The Jiva is different and non-different from the Supreme Lord. So, how are they different? What is the Beda aspect or the difference? Jiva can be controlled by matter, Supreme Lord never is. That's a big difference. And, of course, the Jiva is servant of the Lord. So that's different again. That's different. So, similarity, what is similarity? Similarity is both are conscious particles. They have an ability to be aware, to know, to feel, experience, to act, etc. So both have that capacity. So to distinguish and at the same time show some non-difference, we call the Jiva a Shakti. The Lord is not Shakti, he is the possessor of the Shakti or the Shaktiman. So that's different. But then we say the sameness is that there's a statement in the Vedic literature that the Shakti and the Shaktiman are non-different. So there is similarity there also between Shakti and Shaktiman. So therefore, they have difference and similarity. So we say different and non-different. Nevertheless, we put a little more emphasis upon the difference. We are eternally Krishna Das. So that's the nature of the Jiva, to be the servant of the Supreme Lord. Then, in that statement, Lord Chaitanya says that the Jivas get bound up by Maya, and they become Anadi, bahir, mukha. They forget the Lord, and they turn away from the Lord, and it is without beginning, Anadi. Yeah. At the same time, we have a contradictory statement, Nitya Krishna Das, that you're eternally the servant of the Lord, and here we have the Jiva eternally forgetting the Lord. It looks contrary, but later on Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains that contradiction. So here he just says that we call it Anadi because there's no history when the Jivas in the material world fell into that position. You cannot trace back, he fell at a certain point. So it's Anadi. The Jivas who are here were always here, and they're always opposed to the Lord. They were always ignorant of the Lord. So the Jivas who are bahir mukha, without beginning, they enter into Maya, and then they begin to experience the sufferings of samsara. So this means that the eternal nature of the Jiva, being Krishna Das, is distorted at that point. So this is the temporary dharma of the Jiva, or nisarga. The Jiva associates with matter and develops another sort of characteristic, which is quite different from being eternally the servant of Krishna. So we have the Nitya Dharma of the Jiva, eternally servant, and then we have the temporary Dharma. That is, we're sitting in the material world, enjoying material energy, and we got material bodies. So this is our temporary Dharma, or nisarga. Okay. Just as the spark attains the power to burn and become a huge fire, able to burn the universe, so one Jiva attaining Krishna, the object of prayer, is able to manifest a great flood of prema. So the Jiva is a little particle, and therefore different from the Supreme Lord, who is all-pervading and most powerful, but yet if the Jiva is situated in his eternal Dharma, being servant of the Lord, and he gets prema, then he manifests great power, some remarkable power that is indescribable. So that's the eternal nature of the Jiva. When he manifests that prema and the power that goes with it. He gets so much power he can control the Supreme Lord. So the Jiva is got a lot of potential, and even though he's a small particle. As long as the Jiva does not contact the real object-possessing Dharma, that small conscious Jiva is unable to naturally manifest its full Dharma. Dharma manifests in association with its object. So the Jiva separated from the Supreme Lord does not manifest his qualities properly. When he's close to the Lord, he'll manifest the properties. Just like a spark from the fire. If it's away from the fire, it gets dim. When it's close to the fire, it glows very brightly, and it's got all Shakti in it. So when the Jiva is with the Lord, then he manifests his nature very nicely. When it's away from the Lord, he doesn't manifest it. So, to get back to the main topic of this chapter, the eternal Dharma of the Jiva, therefore, is prema. The mature form of bhakti called prema. That's the nature of the Jiva. In that statement, of course, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, Jiva is Nitya Krishna Das. So that also means if we're situated in that position, relating to the Lord and serving the Lord eternally, that is equal to prema also. So that Jiva experiences and functions with prema. That's his real nature, his eternal nature. And it's based upon accepting the Supreme Lord and serving the Supreme Lord. In the material world, that is covered over. There's no recognition of the Lord. So we don't have that prema. There's no possibility of prema because there's no relationship at all. So the Jiva develops identity with body, and he relates to material objects. So this is the temporary nature of the Jiva in the material world. We say the constant quality of the Jiva is somewhat there, but it's distorted. So the consciousness remains in the Jiva in the material world, and he's still an experiencer, he's still a knower, but it's all distorted. The knowledge is distorted. We think we're a material body. The experience is distorted. Instead of prema and eternal bliss, we get the happiness and distress of the material world. We experience sometimes happiness and sometimes pain. So that's the experience we get in the material world. So therefore, the conclusion of this section is that ultimately the real nature of the Jiva is prema, and anything that can make the Jiva happy, ultimately, because that's his nature. But now we're in a position where it's all covered over. So then we have to work to attain that goal. Now, if we don't accept this as the nature of the Jiva, then we will accept that this will make us eternally happy. We won't accept this as the goal. We'll accept something else as the goal. But we know from the statement of Lord Chaitanya that the real nature of the Jiva is to simply be servant of the Supreme Lord. So therefore that prema is the eternal nature of the Jiva. So by its nature, the Jiva is a small particle of consciousness, separate from the Lord, and capable of getting contaminated by ignorance and material energy. At the same time, its Dharma is to be, say, powerful, whatever, manifest great power, not to be separated at all from the Supreme Lord, to be eternal and pure. And when he's in that position, that prema manifests very nicely. When the jiva is covered over by material energy, impure state, etc., then it does not manifest its dharma properly. Instead of prema, we get other things in the material world, and we get happiness and distress, dualities of the material world. Yeah. Okay. So in the pure state, the jiva recognizes the position, which is to serve the Lord. If we have the subtle body, then we begin to think, I will enjoy the results of my actions. We get the gross body, then we identify ourselves as a certain person, a brahmana, a kshatriya, vaishya, sudra, a king, rich, poor, etc. And then we do our activities with that. So we get two coverings which pollute or distort our natural dharma. That is the subtle body and the gross body, these two things. So each jiva is an individual. Each jiva, therefore, has his own point of consciousness with his own particular likes and dislikes. And therefore, we'll have varieties of jivas in the spiritual world, each with their unique experience of prema. And in the material world, we will also have great varieties of jivas with their experience of happiness and distress, different bodies, different varnas, different ashramas, all sorts of different things spread throughout the universe. So we got a lot of distortion in the material world. So in the subtle body, we get a distortion of that prema. And then we get different experiences of happiness and distress, etc., attraction, repulsion. And then in the gross body, it gets even more distorted. And we involve ourselves in eating, drinking, and enjoying different sense objects, etc. Yeah. So this is the distorted nature of dharma in the gross and subtle bodies. So the dharma that the jiva exhibits in this state in the material world is the nisarga or naimittic dharma or temporary dharma. It's not everlasting, and it keeps changing all the time. It's not complete. The eternal dharma is complete and eternal, everlasting. Okay. When we come to the material world, we have the jivas in the material world. We can divide the dharmas up into three: eternal dharma, occasional dharma, or naimittic dharma, and very impermanent dharma, anitya, really useless dharma. So this is the classic, as far as say Vedic society is concerned. We say the three types of dharma we have. So those dharmas where there is no acceptance of jiva or atma and Supreme Lord, otherwise completely atheistic societies. This is called anitya, very useless. It has its counterpart in the Vedas as well, because we have the karma kanda or the karma mimamsa philosophy, which is basically material, and they don't recognize the Supreme Lord. They kind of recognize a jiva, but his only goal is material enjoyment. So this is, we can say, the lowest level. It's very anitya dharma. So higher than that is to accept a jiva and a Supreme Lord, but we desire to get the mercy of the Lord by temporary methods, not by bhakti. So that's called naimittic dharma. So that's basically the karma yoga system, which has an acceptance of the Lord at the same time. Their goal is to follow varnashram and rules and regulations, and that we say that's the mercy of the Lord, of course, but the aspiration is not prema. So the dharmas which endeavor for service to Krishna with pure bhakti, and that is to get pure prema, that's eternal dharma, and that's bhakti yoga when we practice in the pure form. This could also be applied even to other religions. We can analyze other religions, see how far their goal is to serve Krishna eternally with unmotivated prema. To that degree, we could say that they are practicing eternal dharma. So maybe 5%, 10%, 20%, or whatever like that. And some religions also will be in the other category, like the varnashram system, more indirect, and others will be completely anitya. Okay. So the conclusion was that the Jaiva Dharma, or the eternal Dharma, Nitya Dharma, was prema. That Dharma which causes one spiritual object to be attached naturally to another spiritual object is called prema. So we have Jiva as a spiritual object. We have Supreme Lord as a spiritual object. The attraction between them is called the prema. And so we need two objects for this. So in impersonal realization, there's only Brahman. There is no prema. So it's very essential that we define a Jiva and a Supreme Lord in order to get the prema. The Dharma by which all spiritual objects are eternally attracted to the supreme spiritual object, Krishna, is called Krishna prema. This pure spiritual prema of the Jivas for the Supreme Lord is the Dharma of all Jivas. The Jivas have various natures, thus this Dharma is seen to be distorted into various material forms. The Vaisnava Dharma refers to the pure state of the Jiva's Dharma. The Dharma can said to be pure to the extent it contains the Vaisnava Dharma. So other dharmas may be there. We find these other dharmas are here. If they got a mixture, a little bhakti in them, to that extent they got a little bit of eternal dharma. If they don't, then they're called anitya. Okay. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur in this work and in a few other works also, he has a very broad vision of trying to include the whole world into the idea of dharma. So he doesn't reject any religion. He says they may have elements somewhere of that eternal dharma, or very covered over, or whatever, to various degrees. So if we examine all different countries and religions, etc., and understand their language, etc., we can extract a little bit of this eternal dharma somewhere in there. If we do find it to that extent, it is good. If it is very unclear, then of course it's inferior. If it's very clear, then we can say it's a superior type of religion. Okay. So this prema, we're talking about the prema of the Jiva, is eternal. This looks a little contrary because we're saying in the material world we don't have prema and we're covered by material energy, is all distorted. So how can it be eternal when it gets all distorted or whatever in the material world? And it's also Anadi. And we have this no beginning to our conditioned state in this material world. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur again begins to explain this. How can that prema be eternal when we have jivas who are in the material world and it doesn't look like it's eternal there? He gives a little bit of an explanation here from the point of view of material world, material concepts, and material words. So as long as we're in the material world, we try to relate everything to matter. So then we'll talk about everything has a creation. So we used to talk about a creation of a jiva or a formation of a jiva, when the jiva was here, when the jiva was there, etc. So we get stuck on time concepts and our idea of past and present and future. So we explain things like that, which is material. But in the spiritual world, there is no past, present, future. There's only the present. So we can't really explain things in the spiritual world using the terminologies of the material world. So therefore, when we talk about creation of the jiva, it's more or less metaphorical, and it's a compromise with our material concepts, a little bit like that. So the jiva and the Supreme Lord are spiritual by nature, and they're beyond time and space when we look at them from the spiritual point of view. And in that sense that we can say the jiva's prema is eternal. Because when you have it, then it is eternal. Now we say we don't have it. That's our position now. But in the spiritual world, we have it, then that's eternal at that point. It's not. There's no past, present, future there anymore. In this explanation, the Babaji who's speaking says, to the extent that you receive the bhava of the spiritual world, or the experience of love of the spiritual world, to that extent you'll realize the meaning of this explanation about, the eternal nature of prema. I have given you only a sketch. You will realize the meaning by spiritual samadhi. You will not understand this by material logic and argumentation. So there's only there's a limit to our logic, and we cannot categorize everything according to our logic, because it is limited by our concepts of time and space, and prema itself is beyond that. So therefore, I want to talk about the eternal nature of the jiva being prema. It looks contrary from our point of view, but from spiritual point of view, no, it isn't. But you can only understand that when you realize it. Okay. In this chapter also, Bhaktivinoda Thakur ends by talking about the different types of Vaishnavas, taking actually from the Chaitanya Charitamrita there. So a Vaishnava, because he uses the word Vaishnava in this chapter a lot, so this Vaishnava is one who chants Krishna's name without offense. They can be of three types: Kanishta, Madhyama, and Uttama. This is different from the definition given in the Bhagavatam. So this Kanishta, he is chanting without offense, but he only chants sometimes. He is Kanishta. One who constantly chants, he's got a good vow to chant a lot. He's the Madhyama. And one who can inspire others to take up pure chanting, he is called the Uttama. So these categories are given in Chaitanya Charitamrita by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So these are the three classes of the Vaishnavas. And these Vaishnavas all have no offense, and they're chanting purely. And their goal is that prema, to reveal that Nitya Dharma of the Jiva. Okay. Any question there? Because the next chapter is about the Naimittic Dharma, the Varnashram system.
Yeah. No offense. Is it only the actions we're doing, or is it the mental offense also, thinking different things which are not correct? So those are offenses are also included?
But to some degree, yeah, the mental attitudes are also considered offensive, but if we do actions, it's obviously worse. But if you look at the 10 aparads to the holy name, some seem to be by nature more mental anyway. I think the holy name is like karma kanda or something material and goal. So that's not actually a physical thing. It's just a belief that we have that the chanting is material, or to think that the Supreme Lord Krishna or Vishnu is the same as devatas. Again, it's just the mentality. It's not an action. Of course, you could also start worshiping. So if you go to the center, start worshiping Shiva as supreme, along with Vishnu as supreme, along with Brahma as supreme, etc., then that would be the extreme case when you're doing into action. But even the mentality, the belief, when it becomes very strong, is also considered to be offense. Yeah, of course, then we have others like offending the Vaisnava. So you could do it mentally. It's not considered so bad as physically or verbally doing something, but nevertheless, you have to be very careful because eventually it probably would lead to doing something physical or verbal.
Question. Maharaj, I was wondering, you're talking about eternal dharma, and we are embedded in the temporary dharma right now. If we are the spiritual spark within, what is the easiest way? Why does some of us struggle to reach the pure state of prema as such?
Oh, yeah. Well, as Bhaktivinoda Thakur pointed out, the Jiva has a tatashta nature, so he could be spiritual world or material world. So the Jivas in the material world are in ignorance, and they don't recognize Supreme Lord. I'm eternally the servant of the Lord. So what's the alternative is that I am an enjoyer for myself. And therefore, we identify with a subtle body. This is happiness and whatever like this. And a gross body. I'm this certain person and I do these certain activities. So this, and this is Anadi. We go from body to body to body doing this. So we have a strong conditioning to accept this situation which is not eternal. So it's very difficult to get out of that because we go on life after life like that. Nevertheless, Krishna is very merciful, so he gives us gradual methods and more direct methods of overcoming this situation, getting to our Dharma. So the indirect method is through Karma Yoga and Varnashram system. So that helps raise us up to the point where we can realize when we're in Sattva Gun, we're not the body. I'm the soul. So that far we can get through the Varnashram system, that realization, Sattva. Then we go on to, and then you can start Jnana and Yoga or whatever to try to realize yourself as Atma and get liberation. And then beyond that, you can take to Bhakti Yoga. And through that, then we realize the Nitya Dharma prema. So we get, one is to just get us out of the ignorance and get us up to the point where we realize we're not the body. Then is to fix that realization we're not the body with Jnana and Yoga. And then with Bhakti to realize we have a relationship with the Atma, with Supreme Lord. So that's the indirect process is to go through all that. The direct process is just do Bhakti Yoga and chant Hare Krishna. Then directly you can do that.
Just a couple of questions. At the end there, you were talking about the three levels of Vaishnava.
Yeah.
So you were saying that even a Kanishta is one who chants without offense, but does it occasionally.
Yeah.
So if we're chanting inattentively, that's offensive, right? So in that case, does that mean we don't even count as a Vaishnava?
Well, the inattentive chanting becomes offensive when we make no attempt to do anything about it. In other words, it becomes a way of maybe avoiding the whole chanting process because we just don't even think about it too much. So if we've taken vows to chant, etc., we're at least a little bit above the completely inattentive stage. So our mind may still wander, but nevertheless we are trying to go further. So we're not in that category of being offensive in even though it's called inattention of sorts. So of course we should always try to rectify if we do have the inattention.
And the other thing was, you were saying that if one has prema to its fullest extent, then the soul manifests great power to the extent that they can even control the Supreme Lord.
Yeah.
So if two or more jivas have prema,
Yeah.
So what if multiple Jivas control the Supreme Lord in the sense that they ask him for contradictory things? Like one pure devotee asks for this, but another pure devotee asks for something completely opposite of that. How would the Lord?
Well, because he's Supreme Lord, he can do the impossible. But we see in the Ras Leela, there were 3 billion gopis, and there were 3 billion Krishnas. And then Krishna responded to each one individually, so he can do the impossible, like respond individually with each person. And it could be different. Like with Chandravali, it's different from Radha, the mood, but still, he can do both. Or in Dwarka, you can be with all the different queens, and Rukmini is different from Satyabhama, is different from this other queen there, and he's responding differently, but he's one Krishna still. So the ability of the Lord is to respond to everybody, ideally according to the individual, and they're completely satisfied. That may be different, completely different from another individual, but Krishna can do that because he's everything. He's got all powers.
Maharaj, one question is, as you said, eternally the Jiva is a servant to the Lord, but then we come to this material world, and we try to establish a relationship of Jiva with the Lord, but still we have a material body.
Yeah.
So even if we practice and try to realize that in this material body we are the servant, so there will be always an impact or influence of your material body in the realization.
Yeah.
If you have that relationship already established, does it also reversely control the material existence also of that jiva temporarily?
The body?
Yeah, the body.
Well, actually, the more one advances, the more one ignores the body, kind of, and the more it comes under the control of the Supreme Lord. So he takes care of your body and all whatever has to happen to it, and the jiva himself doesn't really think about it too much at all, especially for a devotee in prema, where they're completely oblivious of what happens to their body, whatever. So it's completely under the control of the Lord at that point. He takes care of everything. Of course, Krishna says that in Bhagavad Gita. I carry what you lack and preserve what you have. So he takes care of those devotees who just beyond their body.
Evidently, what happens in the material body is that even if you try to establish, there is some random thought. So even if you say, God help us to think properly, still we are thinking. Still we are trying to use material context and start thinking. It could be possible that we are wrongly praying because our prayers also are material body praying. That is where it is like, it's more of a psychic situation where constantly we are in the material body with material. So that thought again comes back that am I praying correctly or am I trying to associate correctly? So does Lord help?
Oh yeah. The Supreme Lord understands the imperfect nature of the jivas and their material bodies and their material minds, and he knows how it's a struggle. So he does give guidance. And in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, that he gives you the intelligence by which you can come to him. So he does give you that guidance so that you know what is the correct thing to do. So the more you advance, the more you get that inspiration and guidance. When we're in the beginning stages, of course, we can't even detect what that guidance is. But if we advance, then we can understand what that is. So he helps along the way because we're not perfect. We can always make mistakes.
Right.
I thought you were going home.
He was talking about how prema is the nature of the jiva, the eternal. But then this concept is unique only to Vaishnavism, or particularly Gaudiya Vaishnava. So how do the other Vaishnava lines, understand this concept of prema?
I think they don't state it directly, but obviously it would have to be the same thing if they're saying that your relationship is to be in Vaikuntha or whatever, which would mean that you have to be devotional and completely non-material, etc. So it works out to be the same thing ultimately, but they don't use the same terminologies.
Maharaj, there's a question online. Does Bhaktivinoda Thakur talk about different types of maya or the effects effects of Maya on the Jiva and the Jaiva Dharma?
To some extent, yeah.
Okay. Good. I have a question in regards to the because the scriptures describe Krishna as Atma Rama, which means that he is happy by himself. Mm-hmm. So if that is the nature of the Lord, then the question is, why is there a need for us, for our existence?
Well, the real nature of the Supreme Lord is bliss. So then the question is, how does the Lord experience his bliss? So we can say when it's Atmaram, I'm blissful. But our explanation is that the bliss, the highest bliss, is rasa, which is explained in Taittiriya Upanishad also. The Lord is rasa, and through rasa you get bliss. What rasa means, not one but two. So not only the Lord, then we need someone who's not the Lord, a conscious entity. So that means a jiva, because otherwise it's the Lord, different forms of the Lord. That's not rasa. So we need someone who's conscious but different. So therefore we have a jiva. So therefore when we have a relationship between the jiva and the Lord, we get rasa, and then we get the bliss. So the Lord's bliss is expressed through his relationship with the jiva. So that's the rasa and the prema.
Thank you for a wonderful class. The question is, you thought about prema is eternal jiva. Mm-hmm. So, but then we are in a material world doing material things. Mm-hmm. So our action is always yielding karma to whatever actions we do.
Yes.
Plus, we have the Maya's effect to it as well. Mm-hmm. So when these two are already in place, by default, Jiva is already being a servant to the Lord. Why does it not overposing powers to hide these or control these?
Why doesn't?
Yeah.
Oh, well, we can say this is because the Jiva is tatashta. He has one nature to serve the Lord eternally in the spiritual world. He has the other nature to serve Maya. So the people in the material world have chosen to serve Maya, and they try to do that to the full extent with rejection of the Lord. So this is, we say, the touch nature of the jiva. Why does he do it? Because we can say these jivas are the ones that are ignorant, and they choose not to recognize the Lord. But the Lord is all merciful, and because it is also the eternal nature of the jiva, he tries to get them to that eternal nature through the process of dharma and ultimately bhakti. But in any case, it's a gradual process. You may have to work through the animal species, the plant species, the animal species, the human species, then come to dharma, and then get to bhakti. And that may take so many lifetimes of Brahma to do that. Not just one day of Brahma, many lifetimes of Brahmas to work your way up in consciousness at that level.
Maharaj, there was also another slide where it was talking about one spiritual object can be attracted to another spiritual object,
yeah.
Also the supreme spiritual object, Krishna. I just wanted to understand the first part. How can one spiritual object be attracted to another spiritual object, excluding Krishna from the equation? Like, isn't that just mine?
Well, when we said another spiritual object, ultimately the Supreme Lord, that's what we're talking about. Yeah. Of course, jivas are attracted to jivas also. And therefore, that's why people are attracted to people in the material world, because the jiva in there, ultimately, though they don't know it. Because the spark is there of life, therefore they're attracted to each other in the material world. But then, of course, that's a dull reflection of our attraction to Krishna. So in the spiritual world, everyone is attracted to Krishna, but they also have relationships with each other. but that's always secondary to relationship with Krishna. Okay, fine. Hare Krishna.
Someone wants to